The finance minister there says he can't guarantee that the government will not attempt to use public funds to bail out struggling state-owned enterprises. Malusi Gigaba made those comments at a meeting with the leaders of the trade union federation COSATU. Now, the government there is scrambling to raise money to save companies like the national carrier SAA and the power utility Eskom. Local media reports that COSATU leaders want assurances that South Africa's burdened fiscus will not affect workers' hard-earned pensions and savings as well. Let's dig deep into what exactly this means for pensioners in South Africa. Sumitra Naidu joins us now live from Johannesburg. Sumitra, the minister keeps flip-flopping here on how he will stop SOEs from draining the public purse. In early August, for example, he ruled out privatization in full or in part. 2 months ago, he said the state can't keep using public resources to bail out SOEs, yet now that's exactly what he's proposing. Does the government really have any credible plan here to stop SOEs from being a drain on South African taxpayers?
Well, Rama, it is a rather confusing state of affairs, and that is a valid question. But as you say, even the minister is not sure how he's going to do this, in that he keeps backtracking. So the problem is that he is the finance minister, and what the ANC-led government is sure of is that it wants to hold on to some of these ailing state-owned entities like SAA, which it believes is a strategic asset. So it doesn't want to sell it off, but it constantly needs money to keep the airline flying. So the finance minister needs to make a plan to find this money. As was the case with Eskom, government had to sell off its stake in Vodacom to bail out the power utility because it didn't want to privatize the company. And this is the problem for investors and the ratings agencies, in that it creates uncertainty about how money is being spent in the country and the amount of debt that's building up in keeping these loss-making entities afloat. However, having said that, selling off the shares that government holds in some of these companies was on the table over 2 years ago. There was confirmation that it was going to sell stakes to recoup funds, to clear up some debt. So there was a plan. It's just not clear why the backtracking at this stage. And of course, a lot has happened. We've had 2 other finance ministers since then. So it does create a lot of uncertainty because there's no clarity on how this is going forward.
Indeed. Let's put the scale of the problem into context, though, because there are a lot of big numbers around this particular issue. How big a bill are taxpayers in South Africa footing right now just to keep these inefficient, bloated, money-losing SOEs afloat, and which ones need urgent attention?
Well, SAA, as you mentioned, is the most urgent one right now. It needs just under $1 billion. It is already insolvent, and it's basically been surviving on government guarantees. So in the last financial year, out of all the state-owned entities, just Eskom and Transnet made up 74% of the $10 billion total borrowing by state-owned companies. Now, that figure has increased by a further $2.5 billion, so it needs $12.5 billion this year. Now, government has issued government guarantees worth around $37 billion, $27 billion for Eskom alone. $1.5 billion was set aside for SAA. They have drawn on some of those guarantees, not all of it, but considering their financial positions at the moment, they might have to do so pretty soon, which means that a massive chunk of tax revenue is going towards keeping these state-owned entities alive.
Indeed. Let's move on to the key question, really, for pensioners in South Africa. Why does the finance minister think raiding hard-earned pensions for civil servants is a better deal for taxpayers than just a partial privatization of underperforming SOEs like SAA and Eskom?
Well, again, they believe that these are strategic assets. They don't want to sell them off, and it's part of the ANC's developmental policy and social mandate. These entities were once in white hands under apartheid and only served the interests of the wealthier minority population. So holding onto these assets, it's part of moves to redress the past, to ensure that the majority of the population has access to these services like transport and power and sanitation, to ensure that there's black economic empowerment. So going back to whether there is a plan, it's just there does seem to be a plan there. The ANC does know what it wants to do. It's just getting mangled along the way with mismanagement, fraud and corruption. These state-owned entities can be really good going concerns, but they're just not run properly and they're becoming a drain on the fiscus.